I don't remember a lot of things from middle school, especially middle school classes wise. I do remember, for some reason, in U.S. history, this phrase that always stuck out to me, probably because we talked about it all the time, about the United States of America being what they called a melting pot. You guys familiar with that phrase? We talk about it a lot. Meaning that our country has been built around influence from a lot of other places, a lot of other cultures, and a lot of other peoples. And here in Oklahoma, that is true as well. And being closer to that region, a lot of what we do in Oklahoma is influenced by Mexican culture too. Largely around food and parties, which is, I think, a good reflection of Mexican culture. Those are two things they value a lot. But we take from them a lot of their food and parties. I think mainly we celebrate a good taco. We celebrate good salsa, especially here in Oklahoma. If you try to go north and get Mexican food, it is just not the same. We have it good down here. We also like to celebrate Cinco de Mayo, though we have no idea what we're celebrating, but we are all in it. Try to go to a Mexican restaurant on Cinco de Mayo. I dare you. It's tough. But another one of the most widely celebrated traditions that we've adopted from Mexico is the piñata. The piñata. For decades, we have been tossing up these paper and cardboard themed events or themed items at events, birthday parties, gender reveal parties, any kind of party you can think of. We love to toss up a good piñata. Now, the piñata comes in just about any size, color, or shape imaginable, from the traditional star all the way to modern cultural icons like Batman. And this is a true story. We were in Walmart yesterday and walked past an aisle at the end of the party supply aisle, and they had a whole display of Pixar-themed piñatas. You could leave this place today, go right over to Walmart, and get a Buzz Lightyear piñata if you were so inclined. Traditionally, the piñata, of course, is filled with candy and treats and hung from some sort of tree branch or high item or high place. And then, if you believe it or not, we take a child, blindfold them, spin them around several times so they're dizzy, and then hand them a baseball bat. If it sounds like it could go poorly, that's because it can go poorly. And if you want to dig down the rabbit hole, I spent way too many minutes watching piñata fails on YouTube this last week, and I did not hate it. That's beside the point. The person with the bat then, right, tries to swing and hit the piñata, and eventually, hopefully, the piñata breaks, and the candy falls out, and all the kids rush in and try to grab as much candy as they can. Now, I've been to several piñata parties in my lifetime, and there is no moment like the moment that the piñata comes out. The piñata comes out, and there's immediate excitement because this is going to be fun. The kids all get jacked, and they start screaming, and they get excited. The parents are giggling and trying to make sure that their child doesn't end up with a black eye. And now, this is aside. This has nothing to do with my point. But there's a fine line on where to stand at a piñata party, especially if you're a kid. You want to be close enough that you can rush in and get a good amount of candy, but you can't be too close that you end up getting clubbed. So there's a real song and dance about where you stand in the middle of a piñata party, but we'll go there a different time. But just as there's no excitement like the unveiling of a piñata at a party, there's no bigger letdown than a piñata that won't break. You ever been to one of those? There's such buildup at the beginning, there's such excitement, the kid's whacking away at the piñata and nothing's happening, and very quickly the enthusiasm dies. Kids' attention spans go away, they start wandering off, and even then, after the piñata is finally busted open and the candy all falls down, the rush just isn't the same. We've lost the momentum. The communal joy of a piñata, it turns out, is found not in its strength, but in its weakness. This month, we're working on our way to and through the miracle of the Easter story, but in a little different way than we usually do. You see, the Easter story is kind of the culmination of a lesson that God has been trying to teach us since long before Jesus Christ was even born. We've selected 5 different examples in this theme, but there are a lot more that we could have gone to. Last week, we looked at 1 Samuel chapters 4 through 7, and we studied the story of Samuel and this pile of stones that he calls Ebenezer, or stone of help. There, the Israelites learned that they couldn't manipulate God and manipulate God's presence into strengthening themselves, and that it was only when they admitted that they had no shot and they asked for God's intervention that he did intervene. And when God intervened, he intervened in a way that he made sure they knew that it was him who did it, and only him who did it. He thundered this big, loud clap of thunder that confused the Philistine army. And after this victory, Samuel sets up a reminder. We use the illustration of a trophy, except this wasn't a trophy to their success. It was a trophy to their weakness. And they called it Ebenezer, saying, thus far God has brought us. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. We couldn't have done this without God's presence. Today we'll look at Judges chapter 7, a story about the book of Judges' maybe most reluctant hero, and also a battle won with the most fragile of weapons. We learn in Judges 6 that the Israelites have been given into the hands of another great power, the Midianites. The Midianites were so impressive and so oppressive and so strong that they literally decimated everything the Israelites tried to do. The Israelites planted crops, and as soon as the crops started to come up, the Midianites came and rooted out all the crops and destroyed them. And so in Judges, the early parts of Judges, we actually find the Israelites hiding out and living in caves and in crags and in little places in the rocks, just trying to survive and crying out to God for deliverance. God hears their cry. This is the theme of Judges. God's people get into trouble and they cry out to God, and God hears them. And God sends an angel to appear to a man named Gideon. The angel appears and says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Now stop right there for a second, because in your mind, right, we hear the angel show up to a person, to a man named Gideon, and say, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." And we start to get in our minds this picture of what a mighty warrior might look like. The type of person that an angel of God would appear and say, "Mighty warrior, you are it." So keep that in your minds as we continue to tell this story. The angel of God appears to Gideon as he's threshing wheat in a wine press. Now, we don't thresh wheat very often, and we probably don't press wine very often, so the absurdity of what's happening here might go right over our heads. But you don't thresh wheat in a wine press, obviously by their names. But not only that, a wine press is a really difficult place to thresh wheat. And in fact, we figure out that Gideon is threshing wheat in a wine press because anytime the Midianites find out the Israelites have wheat, they come and steal it from them. So Gideon is hiding in a mountain somewhere, threshing his wheat in a wine press because he's afraid the Midianites are going to come and take it from him. So our mighty warrior we are introduced to in Judges, the first time we meet him, he's hiding. Gideon turns to the angel, and to further our illustration of the mighty warrior, the angel says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon, of course, looks at himself standing in a wine press threshing wheat. And then he also looks at the angel and he says, "I beg your pardon, Lord." Which you know something good is coming after that. He says, "I beg your pardon, Lord, but if the Lord is with us, what is this? Look at where we are. We're hiding out in the crags and in the mountains. The Midianites are oppressing us. They're uprooting our plants at every turn. We can't even make a loaf of bread without them coming to take it from us. And you're going to stand here and tell me the Lord is with me." In fact, Gideon says, "It looks like the Lord has abandoned us, if I'm being honest. You say the Lord is here. Where is he?" The angel of the Lord responds and he says, Go in the strength that you have and save Israel." I haven't seen a lot of strength yet from Gideon. He's hiding. He flat out tells the angel, "It sure doesn't look like the Lord is here." But the angel says, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel. Am I not sending you? Am I not sending you to accomplish this task?" "Strength," Gideon says. "You're sending me in the strength that I have." Gideon says, "I'm from Manasseh. We're the smallest and weakest of all the tribes. And not only am I from Manasseh, I'm the smallest, weakest one in my whole family." This is a mighty warrior, right? Here he is hiding out, questioning every turn, saying, "Go in the strength that I have. I don't have any strength. Everything about me says weakness. I'm from Manasseh. I'm the smallest in my whole family." Sure doesn't sound like what we would picture as a mighty warrior, but maybe that's the point. Through a series of tests, God proves to Gideon that he is who he says he is. Because Gideon says, all right, you say you're going to go with me. You say you're with me. You say you're calling me out of my strength to go and rise up against the Midianites. Gideon says, prove it. Before I go out there, I'm going to need to know that you are who you say you are. I'm going to need to know that you're going to do what you say you do. So he puts God to the test with several different examples there, using some fleece and some water, and do one and then not the other. Eventually, God does prove to Gideon that he is who he says he is. He's going to do what he says he's going to do. And he convinces Gideon to go round up an army and march toward the Midianite camp. And that's where we find them at the beginning of Judges chapter 7. Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. In this first verse, we learn a couple of fascinating things. First of all, Gideon seems to have taken upon himself this general idea, the idea of being a general. So he's camped them at a spring. This is a strategic location. We're told that the Midianite army is camped across the way, so he kind of knows where they are. And he's camped them at a spring, a place with free-flowing, fresh water, a place where his troops can reinvigorate themselves and rest for a minute and drink up and be well hydrated. Gideon is using some military strategy. He says, we're going to camp at the spring, we're going to get all rejuvenated and ready to go. Gideon is trying to give his people the best chance possible in this war against the Midianites. He's taken the mantle upon himself. He's doing some things. He brings them to this spring, and there's a clue here hidden in the Hebrew. We're told that they camp at the spring of Harod or Harod, and the word Harod there is some wordplay in Hebrew, which comes from the Hebrew word meaning trembling. So we're told that he brings his army over to this camp, and they camp at this spring, and the spring's name is Trembling. So they're there, they're together, they're the army, they're marching together, they're camped out, getting ready to go against the Midianites, but they're not building a lot of confidence about it. And in fact, in case we miss that reference, it'll be really clear in the next couple of verses. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me. Now announce to the army, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. So here's our reluctant general, the one who we find hiding at first. And then God says, I'm choosing you to go raise this army and go against the Midianites. And Gideon finally is convinced to go. And he does a good job. He rounds up a formidable force, 33,000 people, and he leads them over to a spring, and he's practicing his good military strategy. And then God comes and says, "Gideon, you have too many men." I'm sorry. Say that again? I think I misunderstood you. Have you seen the Midianite army? Also, we're going to battle. How can we ever have too many men? How can this be a thing? We have too many people? God says, you have too many people. You have too many men, because if you go with that army and you go defeat the Midianites, the Israelites are going to say, "My own strength saved me." Is that a thing that God's people would really do? Yes, it is. Yeah, it absolutely is. They do it several times. We do it all the time today too, right? When we turn to God most are the times when we are the weakest. And when things are going great, I'm doing pretty good on my own, right? We love to pretend that we don't need help. We love to pretend that we don't need anybody else. And God, if it's one thing God knows, it's his people. And it's the hearts of his people. And he says, if they go like that and they win, I'll not have a chance again, because they'll think they're strong enough to do it every time. So God says, anyone who's afraid, anyone who's trembling just gets to go home. And just like that, Gideon's army goes from 33,000 people all the way down to, let's see, what's the math there? 33,000 and 22,000 men left, so 11,000. Just like that. Cut. So for a reluctant warrior, this is not a great start. It's going to get worse. But the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you. If I say, this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs, and all the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and the trumpets of the others. So Gideon's army has now been reduced from 33,000 men to 300. Later that night, God speaks to Gideon, and he says, if you are afraid to attack, go over there and listen to the Midianite army and listen to what they're talking about. Sneak over there and see if you can overhear the conversation. But I love that line. God looks at Gideon and says, you know, Gideon, if by chance you're afraid to attack, go listen. We know for a fact Gideon is afraid to attack. God also knows for a fact that Gideon is afraid to attack. So he says, I'm going to offer you one more proof. Go over there and listen to their conversation. So Gideon and his servant Purah sneak over to the camp of the Midianites. The Midianites that we're told are so numerous they look like locusts have settled on the ground. We're told they have so many camels that it's like the grain of sands on a seashore. They are a huge camp. Gideon and Purah sneak over there, and Gideon overhears one Midianite telling another about a dream that he had. In this dream, he says, a barley loaf came tumbling off the mountain, and it smacked against a tent. And it hit the tent with such force that the tent crumbled. And the one Midianite looks at the other and goes, well, that's got to be Gideon. It's got to be Gideon. It's over. And to them, immediately, to Gideon and to the Midianites, this tells them everything they need to know. And I read that and I go, wait, what? How is that so clear to everybody? I'm a little confused. What does that mean? Well, actually, the barley loaf is a symbol of the poorest among the poor. You see, the Midianites keep crushing down all of the crops of all of the Israelites. That's why Gideon's threshing his wheat in a wine press, because they barely have any wheat. And so when you don't have any wheat, you settle for barley. And so the Israelites are reduced now to eating just barley loaves. It's what they got. The poorest among the poor, because they've been decimated by the Midianites. The Midianites are also nomadic, so they travel around in tents. So here they are camped in their tents. They've got their camels. They've got their nomadic style. And so to them, there is no clearer picture than what this dream could mean. The barley loaf tumbles off the mountain, and it strikes a tent, and the tent collapses. This tells Gideon all he needs to know. So he runs back to his people. He runs back to the Israelites, and he tells them that they've got a plan. God has delivered the Midianites into their hands, and he is going to tell them a plan that would make absolutely no sense to any other military mind that has ever existed. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and he worshiped. He returned to the camp of Israel, and he called out, "Get up! The Lord has given the Midianite camp into our hands." Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them with torches inside. Did you notice anything interesting about what just happened? What are they missing? Swords. There's no weapon here. If I wanted Gideon's people, maybe you could go with the mindset that like we are only 300, but we're the best of the best, right? We have been whittled down to the core crew, and God has given the Midianites into our hands, and we are going to go take it. And then Gideon comes back and says, "It's true, the Midianites are in our hands. Gear up for battle. Here's a pot and a torch and a trumpet." What is this? How are we going to defeat the Midianites with this? What are we going to do here? This makes absolutely no sense. They don't even have any weapons. In fact, there's no way that these could really even be described as weapons. And maybe that's the point. "Watch me," he told them. "Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon." Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew the trumpets and smashed the jars. Grasping the torches in their left hands and holding in their right hands the trumpets they were to blow, they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon," which is funny because they don't have any swords. And while each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords, and the Midianite army fled. So just to recap, God has called Gideon, the one hiding in the winepress, the least powerful person in the least powerful clan, a mighty warrior. He convinces this reluctant hero to gather an army and then twice tells him he's done too good of a job and he has too many men and they need to whittle it down. And then they're armed with torches and pots and trumpets. But in this moment here, as the confusion once again rains down upon God's opposition and the Midianites are turning against themselves, this is a victorious moment. God's people have won. God has won. But God wins a battle with the unlikeliest of generals and maybe the unlikeliest of weapons. In fact, it was precisely the fragility of the clay jar that proves God's point. Once the jar was broken, and only once the jar was broken, could the torch be fanned into flame. A point that Paul will reflect on in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 6 through 10. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made his light shine into our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and it is not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned. We are struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. We so desperately want to be strong. We want to appear tough. We want to be a force to be reckoned with. And God picks Gideon, hiding in a wine press. We want to have all the spiritual weapons. We'd love to show up to God with the sword and the shield in hand and say, "Look at me, I'm ready." And God sends his people out with torches and jars and trumpets. Because the point is not that we would be tough enough to absorb every blow that the world would throw at us, but that we would be weak enough to let the light of Christ flow forth out of our brokenness. We associate the piñata with Mexico, but in fact, its history goes way back a lot further than Mexico. Many think it originated in China and that it was brought to Europe around the 14th century, where it was associated with the Christian celebration of Lent. Before its presence at birthday parties as maybe a papier-mâché donkey or a Buzz Lightyear, it was a clay pot that appeared at religious festivals. It was a celebration of the things that God can do through a broken vessel. And in fact, the word piñata, P-I-N-Y-A-T-A in Spanish, is not even a Spanish word. It comes from Italian, P-I-G-N-A-T-A, piñata, which means earthenware clay pot, or a fancy way of saying a clay jar. There will be times when we feel like we bring nothing to the table. We might ask, why would God choose me? Why would God use me? I am broken. Or like Gideon, we might look around at the circumstances around us and say, God is here? Where? It sure looks like everything around me is in pieces. It sure looks like everything around me is broken. May the clay pot remind us that it is precisely through these moments that the light of Christ pours forth through us. It is precisely in those moments that God's strength becomes most evident. It is precisely in those moments that we can be the most effective witnesses to the power of Christ that is within us. We learn more about ourselves in those broken moments than we do in our strength moments, than we do in our highest points. We learn more about who we are and who we trust in the brokenness. May that reveal to us that our trust is in Jesus. Would his light shine through us in our brokenness out into the world, and would we be testaments to him and his power in us? God wins. We know that. God wins through broken jars and through broken people, because it's not about and has never been about how strong we are. It is about, has always been about, and will always be about how strong God is. The communal joy of the piñata is not when it doesn't break, but when it does, and all of the goodness that is inside comes pouring out for all those who are there in attendance. We've been talking about Ebenezer last week, and every week we're going to have a different image of something that we want to use to remind us about God's presence in our lives. Last week we started with the rock, a little rock. We talked about that as the stone of help that Samuel talks about. And today we're going to talk about these clay jars. It's springtime. Some of you are about to be planting some flowers. You may have an earthenware clay pot on your back porch or on your front porch somewhere. You may go to a birthday party. You might walk down the aisle at Walmart and see a display of piñatas. Every time you see a clay jar, a fragile clay jar, you see a piñata, one that is supposed to bust open and show the goodness inside, may it remind us that it is God's strength in us that matters. We have a God that is more powerful than we could ever ask or imagine. Would we continue to turn to him and allow his strength to be shown through our lives, even through our brokenness? And we can invite you into a relationship with that God today. Would you please come up front, and I'll meet you down here as we stand, and Josh leads us in one more